The Vikings have released their 16-man initial 16-man practice squad for the Minnesota Vikings. We have already taken a look into the 53-man roster for the Vikings, and you'll notice some trends in this practice squad. A lot of the same positions we'll see, and that's specifically at wide receiver and offensive guard. We have multiple offensive guards in this list and multiple wide receivers, and that's because those are the two positions in preseason we saw we don't have much depth. Now, our starting offensive guards looked great. Ezra Cleveland and Oli Uda looked solid. Outside of that, Drew Samia looks terrible. He's still on our roster. And then Wyatt Davis, too, who we just drafted. We don't know a whole lot about Wyatt Davis, but we're going to assume he looks like a third-round offensive guard because that's where we drafted him. So we're going to take a solid assumption there. Outside of that, our wide receivers, again, we just suffered with so many injuries at the wide receiver position. BC Johnson's out for the season. Chad Beebe's out for the season. Blake Prohl, who we didn't get to see any of in preseason, is not there. We didn't get to see any of Justin Jefferson because of injuries. D.D. Westbrook because of injuries. And Adam Thielen, the limited time we saw him, he also got injured. So this is a 16-man practice squad. They're keeping the same rules from 2020. And they might be keeping this for the rest of time. Well, indefinitely, we'll probably have 16-man practice squads. It used to be 12 with only 4 veteran players. Now it's 16-man practice squads with 6 veteran players, and you are allowed to protect up to 4 players on the roster. So starting it off, we have Amir Abdullah. Now, Amir Abdullah, like I said already, I talked about this on the active roster. Amir Abdullah is not going to spend the season on the practice squad. The reason why Amir Abdullah is not going to spend the season on the practice squad is obviously because he is a very solid, healthy running back 3. Amir Abdullah played all 16 games in the 2020 season, where he had 8 carries, 8 receptions, and 2 touchdowns, both touchdowns against his former team, the Detroit Lions, who drafted him in the second round of 2015 out of Nebraska. Amir Abdullah is going into his, I believe it's 6th season in the NFL, and he's not going to be spending the season on the practice squad. The reason why is because Kene Nwanu did suffer with an injury week 1 on the kickoff against the Denver Broncos, and Kene Nwanu has been placed on IR, and Amir Abdullah will step into the role. The reason why he's not on the active roster as of today is because they are currently waiting to see who to cut to make room for Amir Abdullah. Amir Abdullah will be a solid player on this roster because he can stay healthy. He can both play as a running back 3, a very, very solid running back 3. He had 5.8 yards per carry last year, which is higher than Dalvin Cook. I believe that's higher than Dalvin Cook, but then again, he only had 8 carries, so obviously I'm not saying he's better than Cook, but he's a solid running back 3 as he's healthy, and we don't have that same in Dalvin Cook and Alexander Madison, but on top of that can play as a slot wide receiver and can be that wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 6 for the Minnesota Vikings, and that's why Amir Abdullah, we're going to get him out the way and say he's going to actually be on the active roster for the Minnesota Vikings, as they're not going to risk him being on the practice squad and possibly another team taking him, as you don't want to use him as one of your protected players. Next up, we have Zack Bailey, another veteran. Zack Bailey's 2019 UDFA from South Carolina. I believe he played his first season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and after that spent last year on the Vikings practice squad. Zack Bailey qualifies as a veteran on this Vikings roster because this will be his 3rd season in the NFL. Very young offensive guard. Not much to say here other than the fact that it's good to know we have a veteran offensive guard on this practice squad other than Dakota Dozier, because I don't want to see any of Dakota Dozier. I also don't want to see any of Drew Samia. Hopefully Zack Bailey can take Drew Samia's spot if we do suffer with injuries at the guard position, or maybe Ole Uda does not look as good as we are expecting him to be. Dakota Dozier is next on this list. Like I said already, Vikings had no reason to bring back Dakota Dozier. No reason at all. Now, you can argue that it was a good idea to bring Dakota Dozier back because he's played under this Vikings offense and can understand the scheme. I'm not even convinced that's the case. As all we've seen from Dakota Dozier, I don't think he understands the scheme. All we've seen from Dakota Dozier is false starts and holding penalties. Have you seen anything else from Dakota Dozier? He did have some solid blocks on Dalvin Cook. I'll give him that. But in pass protection, he is an awful offensive guard and has no place on this Vikings team. There's no reason to have Dakota Dozier on your practice squad, even though he's a long-time veteran, but not at all a good guard. I mean, he's made millions of dollars being a bottom 5 starting offensive guard in the NFL. And has made millions off of that. There's no reason to have Dakota Dozier in your practice squad. Just have Zack Bailey over him. We have Kyle Hinton also in our practice squad. No reason at all to have Dakota Dozier, as he is the worst player, the worst offensive lineman I have seen out of the Vikings in the last 5 years. And that's saying a lot considering we've had some bad offensive guards as well. Pat Elflein. Pat Elflein's millions times better than Dakota Dozier. And Pat Elflein was also terrible in pass protection. Next up, we have Sean Mannion. Now, completely different story with Sean Mannion. Sean Mannion, I am happy the Vikings signed Sean Mannion. And if you've been paying attention to the podcast, I have not been a Sean Mannion fan at all. I mean, he's been a terrible backup quarterback to Kirk Cousins these last few years. And the limited times we did get to see Sean Mannion, I mean, we got to see him start one game in 2019. He did not look good. And Sean Mannion in the preseason also does not look like not a starting quarterback, not even a quarterback in the NFL at all. But the reason why I'm happy the Vikings did bring back Sean Mannion, and it weirds to say that I'm happy the Vikings brought back Sean Mannion, but I'm happy that they did because I don't want to have Jake Browning on the practice squad. And Sean Mannion already understands the playbook. He knows the Vikings playbook. He's been under this offense for some time now. He can be that solid backup. Not to mention the fact that he is our only vaccinated quarterback. Previously, our only vaccinated quarterback out of our 4 quarterbacks in the quarterback room was Jake Browning. Well, Jake Browning in preseason had a worse preseason than Sean Mannion in 2019 or 2018. And that's saying a lot considering, like I've said, Sean Mannion is not a good quarterback, but I'm happy to have him on this practice squad as a backup to both Kellen Mond and Kirk Cousins because they are both unvaccinated quarterbacks. Kellen Mond does not understand the playbook yet, and if COVID does come through this Vikings quarterback room, it's good to know we do have Sean Mannion over Jake Browning because from what we saw from Jake Browning, he's even worse than Sean Mannion. So while there's a lot of negatives to Sean Mannion, really the positives do outweigh the negatives here as he does understand the playbook. He's a vaccinated quarterback, solid quarterback, number 3 for the Minnesota Vikings. If COVID runs through our locker room, or even if Kirk Cousins gets injured and Kellen Mond doesn't look like he should start a game in the NFL, you can have him sit behind Sean Mannion for a couple games. It's okay. It's a solid move for the Vikings. And then we have Perry Nickerson. Perry Nickerson was one of the only touchdowns for the Minnesota Vikings in the preseason. That was a pick 6 against the Kansas City Chiefs. That was just handed to him. As a whole, though, did not have an excellent performance in the preseason. And you can say that for a lot of Vikings, did not look good in the preseason. But overall, he's a solid player to have on your practice squad. Now he's taking up one of the veteran spots, and he's played in the NFL a few years now. So hopefully that we can see a little bit of Perry Nickerson. If the Vikings do suffer with injuries, hopefully they don't, but we know our Viking secondary will. I mean, Patrick Peterson, Mackenzie Alexander, Bashad Breeland, these are old guys who are going to get banged up. And if we do see someone come in, it's good to know that we will have veteran corners coming in rather than having undrafted corners coming in like we saw last year with Holton Hill and Mark Fields. We saw multiple corners coming out and didn't look good with the Minnesota Vikings. So it's good to know that we will have some veteran corners who are sitting on this practice squad ready to be that next guy up, as we will see injuries on the corner position. And same goes for this next guy, Ty Smith, being our 6th and final 6 out of 6 veterans on the practice squad. Ty Smith, cornerback, 2015 draft pick in the 5th round out of Towson University, drafted by the Tennessee Titans, is another corner that's veteran corner on this Vikings practice squad. It's good to know that we have both Ty Smith and Perry Nickerson who understand the game of football, and they can step in as the cornerback 7 on this Vikings depth chart and possibly maybe start some games if we do see some injuries. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but it's good to know that what if scenario for the Minnesota Vikings. What if we see what happened at corner last year, where basically our entire secondary was banged up, and we do have players like Ty Smith and Perry Nickerson stepping into those roles for the Minnesota Vikings if need be. And then now going into our 1st and 2nd year players for the Minnesota Vikings on this practice squad, starting off with Jake Vargas. Vikings have to have a fullback on the practice squad. Every year the Vikings have a fullback on the practice squad, and I mean, it's worked well. Jake Vargas is a solid backup to CJ Ham. CJ Ham being the best fullback in the NFL. Jake Vargas is a solid fullback to back him up. We saw him last year in the 2020 season when CJ Ham did go down with an injury. Jake Vargas stepped in and looked good in pass protection. He was a great blocker. When it comes to receptions, he doesn't look as great. Although in the preseason, we did get to see him week 1 make some receptions. So maybe Jake Vargas as a wide receiver too, like wide receiver as well. Not wide receiver too. We could see him play some snaps as a receiver if he does step in, if CJ Ham does get injured. Solid fullback, nice backup. UDFA from North Carolina, one of the many colleges in North Carolina. 2020 UDFA, will be on his 2nd season with the Minnesota Vikings, and it's good to know we do have him as a bumper. Tuf Borland. Now, most anticipated undrafted free agent for the Minnesota Vikings was linebacker Tuf Borland, 2021 UDFA out of The Ohio State. Tuf Borland, another player that was kind of surprised to see that he didn't get drafted, will be spending the season on the practice squad and was a UDFA for the Minnesota Vikings. And this is possibly, if there was someone on this list who's going to go from this practice squad and take the starting role, by starting role, I mean he's going to start in the 2021 season, it will be Tuf Borland. And the reason why is because we have a gap at the linebacker position. And we saw this in the preseason, and we saw this in the 2020 season when we did see players get injured. There's a opening on this linebacker position, outside linebacker position for the Minnesota Vikings, and Tuf can really step in and take that starting role. We might see it happen in the 2021 season. And that's because right now we have Nick Vigil starting week 1. Who knows how he's going to look? Anthony Barr is 50-50 to play week 1. Back up to him, we have Chaz Surratt, who we just drafted in the 3rd round. Don't know how he's going to look as well. And then we have Ryan Connolly and Blake Lynch. So our outside linebackers just don't look that great. You also have Troy Dye. You can throw him in the mix as well, but he's mainly a middle linebacker when it comes down to it. So Tuf Borland can honestly start somewhere in the 2021 season as a strong side linebacker. If Anthony Barr doesn't play the 2021 season and Blake Lynch and Ryan Connolly are not looking great, they might activate Tuf Borland and he could take the starting role as an undrafted free agent. We might see it happen. But all in all, excited to see what he can do with the Minnesota Vikings. We didn't get to see much of him in the preseason, didn't make much of a splash, which is why he's spending the season on the practice squad. But maybe second half of the season, we'll see some of Tuf if he can step into that spot, and hopefully Anthony Barr can stay healthy. But like I said multiple times, even if Anthony Barr stays healthy this year, we have to look to a different linebacker because this is probably his last season with the Minnesota Vikings. I hate to say it, but Anthony Barr will likely spend his last season with the Minnesota Vikings this year. And then we have another rookie, Zack Davidson. Zack Davidson was our 5th round draft pick out of the 2021 draft, tight end from Central Missouri. 5th round draft pick, and he's going to be spending the first season on the practice squad. This came by kind of a surprise because it's not like the Vikings are stacked at the tight end position at all. We just suffered with an injury with Irv Smith Jr. Our tight ends to back him up is Hinton, the guy that the Vikings traded from the Jets, and then also Tyler Conklin. It was almost certain, it was a lock going into the season that Zack Davidson was going to be our tight end number 3 over Brendan Dillon and over this new guy that they just brought in. Well, it looks like he's going to be spending the first season on the practice squad, which is coming by kind of a surprise because he was a 5th round draft pick, and typically that's a lock. They should be on the active roster, and he should be making the role, the tight end 3 role with the Minnesota Vikings. However, after the preseason that he did not make the roster and will be spending the first season on the practice squad, which kind of a disappointment, but maybe he will make the active roster. Maybe he's going to surprise people in training camp. This possibly is what he needs, is just a setback to prove himself in the NFL. So I wish the best of luck to Zack Davidson. I know he was planning on actually leaving the team and going to a different team because they didn't let him onto the roster. I can't say I blame him. I mean, he was a 5th round draft pick, but at the same time, you have to prove yourself. I mean, just being a 5th round draft pick isn't enough. You have to prove why you're a 5th round draft pick and why you should make the roster in the NFL. So Brendan Dillon did win the role over him because Brendan Dillon had a respectably better preseason than Zack Davidson did. Then we have Myles Dorn. Myles Dorn, safety from 2020 draft, UDFA out of UNC. Another UNC guy, played with Chaz Surratt in college together, both on the defensive side of the ball. Myles Dorn, 2nd year going into the NFL, 2nd year on the Vikings practice squad, will be backing up both Cam Bynum, 3rd round draft pick, who was backing up Xavier Woods at the free safety position, and then Josh Metellus, strong safety, backing up the veteran, the great hitman Harrison Smith, who just got a new contract. Congratulations to Harrison Smith. Myles Dorn will be on the practice squad trying to win an active roster spot going into the 2022 season. In all honesty, he might be able to do it. And that's not because he's a great safety. That's because our safeties look awful. As we saw in the preseason, both Cam Bynum, Josh Metellus, Luther Kirk, I mean, these guys just did not look good in the preseason. And possibly Myles Dorn can make a case for himself as a strong side or free safety going into the 2022 season. He's first going to have to prove himself. Also, Harrison Hand. Vikings should try to play Harrison Hand at safety more because take away our starters, Harrison Smith and Xavier Woods from the preseason. Harrison Hand looked the best at safety. Harrison Hand did look the best at safety, so maybe playing a little bit of role, give him a role as a backup safety, a free safety in the NFL. I might play him over Cam Bynum, to be honest, from what I saw in the preseason. Maybe Harrison Smith should be a safety. Harrison Hand should be a safety alongside Harrison Smith, both 2 safeties. named Harrison. And then next up, we have Kyle Hinton. Kyle Hinton, 2020 7th-round draft pick out of Washburn. Kyle Hinton is an offensive guard. That is a solid player to have on your practice squad. Kyle Hinton didn't get to see a whole lot of him. He did not have a good performance at all in the preseason. However, it's good to have another guard on your practice squad who can be playing for that role. Kyle Hinton, Zack Bailey, Dakota Dozier, 3 offensive guards on this practice squad who will be playing for that role going into the 2022 season. Kyle Hinton's kind of an underdog here. We didn't get to see a whole lot of him in preseason. From what we did get to see from him in preseason, wasn't that great. So wouldn't expect a whole lot from Kyle Hinton, but good to have another guard on your practice squad who can play for that extra offensive guard spot to be on the depth chart. And then now we're going to our wide receivers. We have 3 wide receivers actually on our practice squad with the Vikings, starting off with Myron Mitchell, wide receiver out of UAB 2021 UDFA for the Minnesota Vikings. Myron Mitchell, from all of the practice squad wide receivers from the Vikings, in fact, all of the preseason wide receivers from the Vikings, Myron Mitchell kind of might have looked the best. Take away KJ Osborne. Myron Mitchell looked better than Amir Smith-Marset. I mean, Dan Chisena didn't get a reception in the preseason. Both those 2 players are going to be making our active roster this year. Myron Mitchell can really make a case for himself as a wide receiver 6, as he might have that edge over Dan Chisena right now because he has had no receptions in the NFL so far. Same with KJ Osborne, who both played all 16 games last year. However, KJ Osborne's undoubtedly right now our wide receiver 3, as BB and BC are both out for the season. So Myron Mitchell, a good place for these wide receivers to actually be is on the Vikings practice squad right now, because our Vikings wide receiver depth looks terrible, and we saw that in the preseason. Our Vikings wide receivers do not look good, especially with all these injuries we're having. So Myron Mitchell can make a case for himself as a wide receiver 6 going into the 2022 season. Next up, we have another wide receiver, Whop Phillier. Whop Phillier, 2021 UDFA from Indiana, star at Indiana, did not look good in the preseason. However, it's good to know we have another wide receiver on our depth chart who knows how to play football. So hopefully we can see better performance than we got to see in the preseason. He did run some option routes that did not look great. They were mixing with other players. So Whop Phillier, he also had a drop in the end zone. That was a perfect throw from Kellen Mond, and I would like to see Kellen Mond have had a touchdown in the preseason. However, Whop Phillier did drop that ball and didn't look great in the preseason. Hopefully we can see a better performance from him. A very anticipated undrafted player for the Vikings going into this draft. He went undrafted just because he doesn't have the speed, the athleticism that other wide receivers do that you need to be in to make the NFL really. But he does have the tape in college, so there's potential with Whop Phillier. Also, another wide receiver Vikings took from the Rams, Tristan Jackson, 2020 UDFA out of Syracuse. Played the 2020 season with the Rams. Another player who's going to be playing for that spot. Not much to say here other than the fact that we have 3 wide receivers who are all playing for that wide receiver 6 role, as it is up for grabs right now. Same with wide receiver 5. Amir Smith-Marset did not look good in the preseason, but he's going to make the roster as a kick and punt returner, obviously. So it's mostly playing for that wide receiver 6 spot right now. Next up, we have AJ Rose, the loved player for the Minnesota Vikings. I said that AJ Rose is going to be on the practice squad. He's going to spend the first half of this season on the practice squad, and that's simply because he is a undrafted rookie. Yes, he's an undrafted rookie with the Minnesota Vikings, is what I'm saying here. Because Vikings, we have Dalvin Cook, top 3 running back in the league, no doubt about that. Alexander Madison, solid backup. Would be a starter if he played for some teams out in the NFL, but he plays for the Vikings, where we have Dalvin Cook, solid backup. Great 1-2 punch in the backfield. However, with those 2 running backs right there, they are both injury-prone running backs, being injured every year they've been in the NFL thus far, and that's why that running back 3 role is very important. Amir Abdullah right now is on the practice squad. However, he will take that running back 3 role with the Minnesota Vikings, while Kane Nwanu is out with the injury. And then it's good to know we also have AJ Rose, who just had an excellent performance in the preseason and had more Vikings touchdowns than any other player on this Vikings team. Although the Vikings went 0-3 in the preseason, it's good to know we did have AJ Rose, who looked great for this Vikings offense after he did have 100 yards rushing in the first game. So great pickup for the Minnesota Vikings 2021 UDFA. AJ Rose will be one of the 4 players that the Vikings will be protecting, so another team doesn't just steal him from our practice squad. And then the 16th and final player on the Vikings practice squad is defensive end Kenny Willekes out of Michigan State, 2020 7th-round draft pick. Pretty surprised that he actually made the roster or the practice squad this year, as Vikings have a lot of defensive ends that they just brought in. Janarius Robinson, Patrick Jones, both drafted this year. You also have Everson Griffin and Stephen Weatherly, who the Vikings brought back. So many defensive ends on this Vikings depth chart. Anthony Hunter's obviously coming back from IR as well. So multiple defensive ends on this depth chart, and Kenny Willekes was that defensive end that made the role on the practice squad over Hercules Mataafa, which comes by kind of a surprise here because Hercules Mataafa is loved by this Vikings organization and has played under this defense for some time now. And it's sad to see that he's not going to be making the practice squad this year, and the Vikings chose Willekes over him, which is kind of understandable. I mean, Mataafa is a veteran player, and anywhere else in the NFL, he'll likely be on the active roster. So having Willekes on this roster is a good spot for him to be. He had a great performance in the preseason, and hopefully, if he does play in the future, will also look as good as he did in the preseason. So that wraps up the Vikings 16-man practice squad. Looks great at the running back position. A lot of offensive guards, 3 offensive guards, 3 wide receivers taking up those spots as they are playing for that extra role on the Vikings defense and on the Vikings offense this year. So I hope you all did enjoy this episode, an in-depth look at all 16 players on this Vikings practice squad. Again, this is not going to be the 16 players that are going to be on the practice squad week 1, as there will be some adjustments, starting with Amir Abdullah, who will start this 2021 season week 1, will be on the active roster this 2021 season on week 1. I hope you all did enjoy listening to this episode. Let me know what y'all think.